The search for 300 Savage Brass, a personal affront to teated bulls and toothed hens everywhere. Okay, this is going to be a different kind of episode. After going through some of that 300 Savage Brass that we've been firing, I've found some serious inconsistencies, and it bothers me. But I have to temper that with the fact that I know that those casings were utilized over the course of several decades, perhaps as many as 6 decades. There's really no way to know who's who within that group. You can measure and sort any way you want. You're going to have differences. So what I've decided to do was replace that brass, not get rid of it, but replace it for the sake of this testing. Problem here is that brand new 300 Savage Brass about as rare as Amish phone books these days. So after an exhaustive search and not being able to locate any, I decided to dip into my supply of once fired Federal cartridge 308 Win, which should be a suitable candidate for making our 300 Savage out of. The bright side of this is that these Federal gold medal match or Federal cartridge 308 Win casings, they don't have a super heavy wall thickness, which is going to leave it to where once we form these into 300 Savage, we're not going to need to neck turn them. That's a beautiful thing. So the first step in this process was for me to take and cut a couple casings down, deburr them, chamfer them, and heavily lube them, send them up into a sizing die, and see what I get. And after doing some experimentation over the course of, well, I guess 2 casings that went to the recycling bin as a matter of my testing, I came up with a suitable number. And what you need to do is cut the neck down initially. This is for my method and what I think is the appropriate way to do it, is to cut that neck down to somewhere around 1.920, give or take, ballpark, neighborhood number. That's all we need. That's to get us started. We're going to do a lot more trimming after the cutting. So what I've got in this Drill Master 2-inch benchtop cutoff saw from the Chinese tool company is a little jig that's actually made for cutting down 308 or 6.5 Creedmoor. I think it's actually made for cutting down 6.5 Creedmoor for making it an 8.6 blackout. And it's been a great tool for that. But I found a way to utilize it for 308 brass to cut off the requisite amount by putting a mark on the jig with a marker after experimenting with lengths. And now I get to right where I need to be. And all I need to do is cut this amount off. And I should make it right to that 1.92 measurement, somewhere around there. Okay, there we're just under. I'm happy with that. So with like 50 of these done, I got like 60 to go because I'd like to have 110 of these ready for testing and for ciders, foulers, etc. replacements. All right, after trimming them down with my Chinesium saw, the next thing I'm going to have to do before I go ahead and size them is to deburr and chamfer them because they have this nasty, wicked looking cut. That's just not going to do it going up into the die. So off to the races. We get to do this twice. With all these cut to basic length, then deburred and chamfered, and then heavily lubricated with a whole bunch of one-shot, they're ready to size. For me, this is sort of like a 4-step process. I'm going to take one, put it in the press. I'm going to run it up in the die about 20-25%, then about another 25%, then about another, and finally bottom it out. And because you know me, and I got rabies, I'm going to spin it 180 degrees and then pull it out and check it. Now, I decided to set our headspace a little tiny bit longer because the measurements I got out of the fired brass last time. So I'm looking for 1.592, and there you go, 1.592. She's right on the money. So you're almost home. You just got a 300 Savage with a real long neck on it at this point. Good to go. I should also have mentioned that these are all freshly annealed. These were a once fired federal gold medal match. And what I did was deprimed them, cleaned them, and then immediately went to annealing them. You may not be an annealer. You might not even believe in annealing, but this is one case where annealing will do you wonders. Annealing is sort of the magic of this process because it reduces spring back. So when you form this brass, it's it's really unnecessary for me to run it back up a second time after flipping it 180. That's just a habit that I have. This brass is not going to spring back as much as it would if it was, say, work hardened or second or third firing or never annealed at all since factory new. And now we need to trim them to final length 1.870. Going to run them a little longer than we did previously. I'm going to start with them long, see how much they grow, see how much we need to change. Then we're also going to deburr and chamfer. It's a lot of cutting because they were really long. Even after the preliminary trimming. Okay, so no doubt some good questions are going to arise regarding case capacity for this 308 converted brass versus 300 Savage factory brass. So we're going to try to get some answers here right off the rip. We've got 5 300 Savage casings that have been deprimed, cleaned, annealed, full length sized, trimmed to length, deburred and chamfered, cleaned out again, and then primed with Federal large rifle number 210 primers. Then we have 5 308 casings converted to 300 Savage, which have also been cleaned and prepped fully, and they are trimmed to the same length, deburred and chamfered. What I can tell you just by looking at them with the naked eye is that you have a slightly heavier wall on the neck of the converted 308 casings versus the 300 Savage. Now, is that going to equate to less case capacity overall? That's unknown. But also there is a disparity in the weights. So I grabbed 5 random cases of 300 Savage because that's how it would happen when you're loading. And I grabbed 5 random cases of my converted 308. In the 300 Savage, these casings range from 159.66 grains all the way on up to 166.4. That's a pretty large disparity. I mean, it's darn near 7 grains difference between them. But remember, this represents probably 6 decades worth of shooting. We have no idea the vintage of each of those casings. This 308 converted brass, the lightest is 178.42 and the heaviest is 178.96. That's pretty nice. About a half a grain difference between the 5 of them. I was shocked by that. So we're going to see how this works. All of these casings are primed with the Federal 210s. And what we're going to do is gently and carefully fill them with water all the way to the top so that the quote meniscus is level across the mouth of the case on the scale. And we're going to get the weight filled with water for each of those cases. And then we'll take an average and we'll do the same for the 300 Savage cases. And I've already done the averages for the weights. The 300 Savage cases average 163.9 grains. The converted 308 brass averages 178.66 grains. Kind of interesting. That's a pretty big jump. I'm thinking that we're a little thicker on the 308 converted side. We're going to find this out. So we'll start by taking a 300 Savage casing and place it on the scale. And get our weight there, 166.4. And we're going to fill it up with distilled water. That might take a minute. And try to put a low and solitary drop on there. It's a little bit concave. Okay, that looks dead level. 217.78. Two 16.88. 216.10. 215.56. 212.06. Okay, now the 308 converted brass. 229.28. 229.14. 228.62. 228.56. 228.42 looks like. All right, time to do some math. All right, we'll take a real quick run through the capacity numbers. When we measured the 300 Savage brass, empty, dry, and primed, those 5 casings averaged 163.9 grains. When we filled them with water, they averaged 215.68 grains. Do the quick math there, subtract that dry weight from the wet weight, you've got a case capacity of 51.78 grains of water. The converted 308 brass, empty, dry, and primed, averaged 178.66 grains, filled with water, 228.8 grains. Subtract that dry weight from the wet weight, the case capacity is 50.14 grains of water. So the 308 converted brass has less capacity at 1.64 grains less than the factory 300 Savage brass. So it begs the question, where did that 1.64 grains go? Well, the simple answer is in the neck wall thickness and also likely the case head web. It's probably heavier in that 308, made to accommodate a higher pressure. For those curious, a little quick slideshow showing a piece of 300 Savage brass, fully prepped and inserted into the chamber, seated all the way home. You can see how it meets the chamber wall there. And then you're going to see a close up here of where you see the end of the case mouth as it meets the end of the chamber. Pretty decent gap there, even though we've run them long, just 1/1000th under max. Here's a converted 308 wind casing, same condition, and you can see it inserted in the chamber. Still plenty of space there. And if you look, identical length, so obviously identical distance from the end of the chamber. Pretty generous chamber, still have lots of room. Looking at that, I don't know, I haven't measured it, but I'm going to say there's probably 2/1000s there at least more case length that you could run if you really wanted to. However, I won't. Well, can you guess which one's which? Maybe, maybe not. Color of the brass kind of gives it away. We're going to take our eye gauging easy data mic. We're going to go ahead and take a look at some of these necks and see what we get for wall thickness on them. 0125. Spinning a good 180. 0137. Make sure I got that set up right. 01365. It's like 121 there. Spinning around. 127. So now, that looks pretty normal to me. These are going to be real heavy. Here's a 308 converted casing. 153. Spinning around 180. 171. That's pretty heavy. That's a pretty heavy neck. 160. 162. Well, that one's pretty consistent. So what are we going to see as a result of that? Obviously, we're going to see greater neck tension. That actually could be a good thing since I'm a non-crimper, as everybody's well aware. This might work out in our favor. Might not. You never know. I don't like to see the inconsistency. However, you see that inconsistency in the stock factory 300 Savage brass as well. In fact, you see it in a lot of brass, and unless you're in neck turning, you're just going to live with it. In the case of this rifle, being a short range inside a 400-yard rifle, I'm not going to concern myself with it unless we see a problem due to its presence, which I'm really doubtful of at this point. So after measuring all those, I went back and measured them again, recorded 2 measurements from each neck, 180 degrees apart. I know you could spend all day doing 30 measurements each or 60. You'd measure till your heart's content. I took 2 opposed to each other to get a basic average. On the 300 Savage case mouths, I ended up with an average of 0.0119. So 0.0119 being almost 12/1000ths. When I measured the 308 converted brass, no secret, it was going to be a lot bigger, 0.0155, so 15.5 thousandths. Quite a difference there. There's a disparity, 3,500 worth of difference. That's quite a bit. We're going to see what that equates to in what I would call holding force or neck tension. But those who are snooty about it are going to tell you that it's simply a matter of interference. It's how much smaller the ID of the case mouth is in comparison to the OD of the projectile. Best way I can figure to show you this is to go ahead and seat a bullet in maybe one or two of each, measure them before and after, and we can talk about deducting the wall thickness and seeing what our difference is there. So we've got our dial set up. I think our depth is correct, and actually it doesn't really matter because we're going to end up pulling these out anyway and reutilizing them. But we're going to be pretty close to where we were when we loaded our last set of rounds. The Spear Gold Dot 168 grain. This is the one that I want to make work for this rifle. That's why we're using it for our test here. We've got 1.8600 in the Federal cartridge brass. This one came up shorter. Seating in the Savage brass, you definitely feel less resistance. 590. So we're going to take our 300 Savage. We're going to measure it. I guess we'll use the flats right below the case mouth. 0.331. And then our converted 308 Federal cartridge brass, 340. So there you have 0.003 difference between these two. Enough to make a difference at the chamber? Well, 331 or 331 and a half or 332. I guess it depends on where you grab it. A couple thousandths difference between these two. So the question is it going to make a difference going in the rifle? And I think the answer is no. We're going to check it and see. So we've got somewhere on the order of 0.008 difference. Sounds like a whole lot. Sounds like a real big number. Sounds almost scary or dangerous. It's not. I did notice when loading this Federal cartridge 308 converted brass that there was a lot more resistance at the ram. Not a ridiculous amount of resistance. You could just feel it, and it was very consistent. Where this older 300 Savage brass, I don't know if it's the amount of firings or if it's just the difference in the wall thickness. It seems to give you some resistance right out of the gate, but once you get it started, it goes down like butter. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and place our converted 308 brass in the mag first, or our dummy round in the mag first, and we'll put the 300 Savage brass, the factory brass, in above it. So we'll go ahead and put the 300 Savage dummy round in there. We'll eject it out, and we'll send our 308 in there. No problem. Just like it's supposed to. So prior to loading, our converted brass has given us 334 and a half, sometimes 335. We'll say 334 and a half on average is what we've been getting. And then loaded, you're getting 3400 on the money. So we've got about 5,500 holding force there. Seems like a lot. We're going to test it. I'm not quite sure. I don't think it's going to be a factor or a problem, at least. If you look at the Savage factory brass, there you got 325.5, 326 with a bullet in it. About 331 and a half. So you got about 5,500 there. So there's always been a ton of debate over how do we measure neck tension. Neck tension or holding force, or what the military uses, which is known as extraction force. They're all totally different things in reality. But what we're looking for here, real world, is the difference between this casing loaded and this casing when it comes out of the die. In here, you've got about 5 thousandths, maybe 5.5. We have the same thing over here with our converted brass. Yes, it's a much heavier wall. Yes, I understand that there's going to be more mechanical tension there. It's capable of withstanding more before it releases or starts to grow. And that's where we're going to see a difference in our testing. However, we're not going to be firing any of the 300 Savage brass this time around. I'm going to start working on this lot of brass specifically because I think it's going to be more consistent overall. The weights alone, dry or with a primer in them, were astoundingly close. We were within, I just grabbed 5 random samples and was within a half a grain. That to me is fantastic. I wasn't expecting that. I don't think all of that 308 brass that I converted came from the same lot or same boxes of ammo. So I'm just very happy to see that in general. So this is going to be a very interesting experiment. But here we've got 308 converted 300 Savage brass that cycles in the rifle, and we're going to take it to the range on this next time around. So I don't know if you really learned anything from this video or not. What you did see was how a guy who was all out of options for getting his hands on new 300 Savage brass went ahead and made a bunch. I have a feeling that we've removed some inconsistency versus the 300 Savage factory Remington Peters casings. That's my assumption at this point. We'll see if I'm proven right or wrong. So thanks for coming by, everybody. I appreciate you being here. We'll see you in the next video in this series. We'll be taking some of this loaded out to the range. Till next time, take care and shoot straight.